Good morning. It's June 8th, 2022. Welcome to Triggered. I'm Cory Morgan. This is the Western Standard's daily live interview events show. We run Monday to Friday, 11:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time till about 1 p.m. Usually, that's how interesting the guests are. I could run a little longer, or sometimes we go a little short. We got a good show ahead again today. Always lots of issues, lots of things to discuss, and let's get on with it. I start, of course, with our daily observances, and Dave was questioning it. I pull these up for a couple of reasons. For one, actually, these first couple of minutes, I want to make sure everybody's joining. So we'll talk about some lighter things while everybody gets in there to catch the show. And it's just interesting to see these things that we've made formal observances for every day. There's a big list of them. Every day has something standing out for it. And Dave was wondering, actually, as he saw me prepping or saw this in the list, if I'm, getting a little too dark with this. But it is Brain Tumor Day. Yes, it is International Brain Tumor Day. I'm not sure, I guess, why one is needed. And I do take this seriously, actually. A friend of mine, Hutch, passed away just a bit over a year ago from a malignant brain tumor. It is very real and it's very serious, but it just seems kind of odd, too. And I'm not sure what's to be accomplished through having these. But all the same, I bring up these observances, some of the light and some of the dark as they come up. So, I mean, hey, if you are concerned about those kinds of things, today is the day to make everybody aware of brain tumors, I guess, and the damage they cause. Getting on to the lighter end of things with the observances today as well, it's Jelly-Filled Donut Day. So this is the day you're allowed to indulge. Get out there, get that jelly-filled donut, spill it down the front of your shirt at the start of the workday. Do everything that's good with those sorts of things and enjoy yourself. So don't miss another Jelly-Filled Donut Day. It's unforgivable. I got a couple of great guests on today. I got Spike Cohen. He was the Libertarian Party of the United States vice presidential candidate in the last election. He's been a libertarian advocate and activist down in the USA for quite some time. And of course, a big issue that's been coming up in Canada and in the United States, of course, has been firearms and firearm controls, firearm culture. I want to get more of that American viewpoint on this. I mean, we're having that debate in both countries right now. I mean, the United States gun control is really coming up in a big way down there, of course, in light of the horrific school shooting in Texas. And up here in Canada, we've got Justin Trudeau trying to basically work towards a ban of all legally owned handguns within Canada. So we'll have the discussion from that liberty point of view on both sides of the border there on this issue. I'm also going to have Jade Savage, and she has run the Etick app. And what it is, it's kind of like it sounds like. It's an app, and it tracks wood ticks across Canada. You can I'll get more details out of her what that's all about. But I mean, wood ticks have been on the rise, and they carry a lot of nasty diseases and things. And a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of them. And there's an app now, though, if you encounter ticks, whether on your pets or yourself, you can share those encounters, register them, and it just helps with the general tracking of ticks. And it is that time of year. People are going to be hiking, working in the yard, getting out in the farm fields, whatnot. And you're going to encounter those rotten, gross little creatures. I encountered so many when I used to work in the oil field. So good to see you all coming in from all over. Monty Lake, a couple from Monty Lake there, and Cold Lake, lots of lake people. I'm stuck in the city right now. Sherwood Park, good to see you all in the comment scroll. So yeah, that reminder, it is live, so use that comment scroll, chat with each other, chat with me, send comments. It's appreciated and reminds us that I'm not just speaking to the empty air. There's a bunch of you out there listening to me babble, rant, and rave. And I'm going to get going on what I'm ranting about for today. And, this gets... an industry I'm very accustomed to. I mean, I grew up in Banff initially. I'm very familiar with the tourist industry, and I owned a bar for some years, the hospitality industry. It's a sensitive one. So Canada, though, is unfortunately just hammering in its own tourist industry, just hammering it. So, I mean, the world, for the most part, is finally accepting COVID-19 as being endemic, which means it's just here for good. And they're leaving the pandemic behind them. People are working to return to normalcy and start to enjoy life again. One big element of that, of course, is a return to traveling. During the height of the pandemic, travel and tourism around the world ground to a halt. Countries closed borders and locked down. Even domestic travel came to a standstill as lockdowns banned movement. And in Canada, we even had some interprovincial border closures. Countless hotels, restaurants, other tourist-associated businesses have collapsed. Others have managed to scrape by, but they had to cut their operations to the bone and laid off most of their staff. Now, businesses in the tourism sector that have weathered the storm, they've been looking forward to a recovery in the summer of 2022. They desperately need it as they try to recover the staff they had and pay off the debt they incurred in the last 2 years. And by all indications, the tourism sector around the world should experience a mini boom this summer. Many people have been itching to travel and they plan to get out and spend hard this year. They've been cooped up, they've missed events, and they've been separated from distant relations and friends for years. They're going to get out this year and make up for it. Canada, though, appears to be determined to keep its tourism sector dejected and broke. While nations around the world are rolling out the red carpet to visitors, Canada is making itself look as unwelcoming as possible. Canada's government refuses to accept the pandemic's over. We remain one of the only nations on earth with vaccination mandates and masking on planes and trains in the country. This cuts deeply into both domestic and international travel. These mandates don't just shut out the non-vaccinated. They're wreaking havoc in airports and border crossings as security lines are causing massive tourist delays and travel delays and misery for tourists. Former NHL player, gone podcaster Ryan Whitney documented his horrific experience while stranded in Pearson International Airport the other day as he futilely tried to travel to Boston. Hours and hours of pointless lineups, crowds of stranded passengers, and canceled flights put him through a weekend of hell. The video went viral, and while it's great to expose this mess, it also sent a message around the world and domestically that Canada is not a good place to travel within. Now, these lineups and this mess are created by vaccine mandates. Mandates cause the firings of thousands, leading to labor shortages throughout federally regulated sectors, including airports. So that's airport security, ticket people, and customs agents. With proof of vaccination being demanded, the processing time for travelers flying domestically as well is hindered, and of course heavily hindered when people are entering through customs. Land crossings are little better. I traveled to the United States just a few weeks ago. It took me 5 minutes to go into the United States. It took me over an hour in line to get back into Canada, though, as vaccine requirements delayed customs agents. Canada is literally, as well on top of all this, marketing itself as a nation that's still keeping its citizens masked. In a paid advertisement by Parks Canada, I saw this last night when I was online. I was shocked. A picture depicts a couple taking a selfie alone in the middle of the mountains while wearing masks. This is a promotional picture. You can't make this sort of stuff up. What kind of image does that present? The Rocky Mountains have some of the freshest air on Earth. Why the hell would somebody mask themselves while touring them? The message projected is that Canada remains mired in the pandemic of 2021 and that restrictions are still heavy. This won't draw people who are seeking to relax and enjoy vacations while leaving the pandemic behind. The damage is brutal, and much of it is irreversible, as many people have already made their travel plans and decided against visiting Canada. We can't start to undo this damage too soon, though. We should be reversing our damn unscientific mandates and letting the world know we're open for business. Instead, we're projecting an image of a nation where people still can't travel freely and can't even look at the mountains without a mask on, the freshest air on Earth. The feds aren't showing any signs of backing off anytime soon either. Our tourism sector is going to take years to recover from this, and for no good reason, aside from the actions of a stubborn, vacuous man-child of a prime minister who has a chip on his shoulder. Well, I guess we can just pray for the tourism industry. All right, that's enough of that. Let's get on to other news and bring in our news editor, Dave Naylor. Hey, Dave, how's it going?
It's going well, Cory. Hey, I understand that every time Duke the Wonder Dog walks by your TV now, the channel changes. What's going on there?
Just about. He's consumed 2 remote controls now. And yes, as I was mentioning that in the newsroom, that he has a good digestive system. Things pass right through them. And they were those big remotes. So, I was finding like little numbers and letters in his waist as I was cleaning the yard. I'm waiting for a message to be spelled out in one of them. So far, there's been nothing coherent yet. It just looks like a Trudeau speech, but we'll see.
Is there nothing that dog will not eat?
I haven't found anything yet. He ate a whole bottle of hot sauce the other week. The one thing you'd think he'd ignore. No, he's I don't know what that dog.
Yeah, I bet that created a bit of a mess.
Yeah, well, it hurt him more than it hurt me in the end, I think.
Yeah. Well, we got some good stuff on the website already this morning, Cory. We've got a exclusive up there on Freedom of Information documents that we filed almost 2 years ago to the date, looking for how much it was going to cost the feds when the big gun ban was announced. They sent a letter out to every gun owner in the country telling them what the new rules are. And it turns out that cost a pretty penny, $2.5 million to do that. So it's a lot of licking of stamps to get that higher rate. We've got a good story and good photos of a kidnapping drama east of Calgary. people had pulled over to a rest stop. Their baby was inside, but a bad guy jumped in and fled in the car. They were able to wave over a bystander who followed them close by. But the guy basically, during the high-speed chase, 160 kilometers an hour down Highway 1, he suddenly stops and dumps the baby on the side of the road. And that picture you see there is the RCMP officers rescuing the baby, I guess, or picking up the baby from the side of the road. And there's another picture in the story of RCMP in a foot chase to capture the guy. So, which they ultimately did. So, Calgary guy is facing charges of abduction and fleeing police, all sorts of good stuff like that. So, good work by the RCMP there. If you remember yesterday, the CDC issued a monkeypox warning. They raised it to level 2 and put a masking recommendation in place. Well, that has quickly disappeared. I guess it caused a bit of an uproar, and the masking requirement or recommendation has suddenly disappeared. We've got lots more fallout today, Cory, on that terrible story of the woman killed by the 3 pit bull type dogs. There's a GoFundMe set up for the woman. Sounds like a lovely woman, lived in Capitol Hill for 50 years and was beloved in the neighborhood as she gardened, and that's where the dogs got her when she was out gardening. Our Mel Risden has done another look at the controversy of the breed itself. Already there's been calls for pit bull type dogs to be banned in Calgary, as they are in most major cities in Ontario, not allowed to be housed within city limits. And there's the other side of the story in there too, on the pit bull lobby group fighting for their side. We've got a story from our Jonathan Bradley in Ontario. If you remember, Cathay Wagenstall was escorted from Parliament, Saskatchewan MP, because she wasn't vaccinated. They've now got basically wanted posters on the security desk of this MP. So eagle-eyed security guys can keep an eye out for this woman and just make sure she doesn't get anywhere near Parliament Hill. And you can see the photo there on the desk of the security officer. Our Reed Small in Vancouver has done a story on the coroner's report into the tragic heat dome last year. Killed more than 600 people. Their study has found most of them were elderly and lived alone, and they're now trying to take steps to prevent it again. And soccer fans in Saskatchewan, happy in Saskatoon, plans for a new $28 million stadium have been announced. They're getting an expansion team in the Canadian Soccer League. So all the footy fans in Saskatchewan are going crazy, and I'm sure that franchise will do very well, because other than the Rough Riders, not much to do there, is there, Cory?
There's a few things happening out there, but sports-wise, yes, for the big names, that is all they have.
I wonder if they'll wear watermelons on their head to the soccer game.
Well, you never know. No.
One never knows. All right, Cory, give Duke the Wonder Dog a pet for me tonight, and we'll see you on the pipeline.
Yeah, well, I noticed there was a commenter, Stone Lee, asked if Duke eats chickadees. We do have those in our yard as well. I guess he was asking on your behalf, as you've had your chickadee challenges. I haven't seen Duke going after anything alive, actually. Maybe a dead chickadee, he would go for it, but I'm afraid it probably wouldn't aid with your problems.
I forgot to tell you, I've got a chickadee plan now. Slingshot. All right? But, I'm not the heartless bastard my parents and all my friends think I am. So what I'm going to do is, those little tiny marshmallows you put in hot chocolate?
Oh, yeah.
That's what I'm going to fire at it. Because that way it'll go away. It'll leave me alone, but it won't get hurt. Plus, the marshmallow will fall to the ground and feed the squirrels. So it's a win-win situation.
Great. Well, I look forward to seeing how the chickadee control endeavors go.
Yeah, he's driving me crazy.
Right on, Dave. Thanks.
All
right, that is our news editor, Dave Naylor, with the chickadee hater. But aside from that, he also edits and manages our news copy and does a fantastic job out there. As you can see, the stories are breaking, exclusive stuff, even our own freedom of information requests, things like that. We're getting out there. We're getting unique news. we're bringing those stories to you. And this is when I remind you that we do this because you guys subscribe. That's the only way we can. We qualify for tax funding. We aren't going to take it. We refuse to. It's a point of pride. It's a point of reality. But that means we have to have subscribers to keep doing this. And you guys have been great. Subscriptions keep going up. They keep growing. Thank you all who have already subscribed. And if you haven't already, get out there, guys. westernstandard.news. This is how we maintain independent media. This is how we keep, from the legacy news, the mainstream media feeding you that crap. You need those alternatives. We do that because you guys subscribe. If you haven't already, $99 a year. So that's less than $10 a month. Or if you just want to go month by month, it is $10 a month of, minor investment. 30 cents a day we're talking, and you get full access to all of our news copy and all of that good stuff. So, hey, get out there and take out a subscription. Some of the other stuff getting me going. There's a thing going on right now in the city, and we're going to talk a little about that. We record the pipeline. That's another one of our shows, and that'll come out tonight. Maybe we'll have more answers at that point. But we've talked about that on this show before. I mean, Calgary has got just a ludicrous climate change plan. We're talking $87 billion. Yeah, $87 billion for a city, for a climate change plan. And Mayor Gondek was furious when she couldn't get it ramrod through when it was first brought to council. So the other day, it ended up getting voted to be deferred until July. So at least they can chew on this, look at this for a month, and get a better idea. Well, it sounds like there's a move in city council now. No, they're trying again to shove it through today, get it on the table, and entrench this policy before the end of the day. What's the rush? What's the rush? And she just wants that jammed through there. $87 billion. We're talking over, where do you go with this? Over $100,000 a household. $6,000 a year in property tax increases to make that up. But of course, they call it an investment. What do you mean an investment? It's a theft. It's going to screw the city. And you listen to the delusional crap out of the mayor of Calgary, Gondek, when she was going on saying, if we don't get this in, this is sending the wrong message. If we don't get this in, it's going to rattle business confidence in Calgary. Really? They're nuts. They really are. How would you think any business would look at it and say, yes, I want to see a city piss away $87 billion on a climate plan that isn't going to change anything. And if they don't put it in, I'm not going to feel confident. She has no sense of what business people want. That's why we have a dismal, dystopian, empty downtown. That's why all of these new businesses that have been moving into Alberta move into the Rocky View. They're moving into neighboring communities because they're not coming into this lunatic city. And it's not for a lack of a climate plan that they're going outside of the cities, because the taxes are too high. So if you go blowing $87 billion, and that's just their speculated $87 billion, that budget's going to go higher. The taxes are going to skyrocket. These guys are just completely math illiterate. Shirley Gervais saying, why does Alberta cities keep electing radical left municipal governments? It's not just Alberta, it's everywhere. Vancouver, Toronto. I mean, the loony left has learned to win the municipal elections. The reason they do is because they can slide under the radar. There's no party. They run as independents. They lie. The bottom line, look at how Nenshi got in. Nenshi claimed to be a pro-business conservative when he won as mayor. And once he got in, he was anything but. I mean, Nenshi ushered in one of the few times we actually saw hundreds and hundreds of business owners marching on City Hall in a protest because the business taxes got so high. Never seen that in the city. But he got through. And part of it's our own fault. We don't get off our asses and vote them out. You got to start getting up and firing these guys. Once a city councilor gets in, it doesn't matter how nutty they are. We don't get up and vote them out. So what message are we sending them? The responsibility is still yours. We got all kinds of challenges to our democracy right now, but you have the ability to get out there and fire these guys. And when you get city councilors, some of them sitting around for 30 years on those seats, well, who are you going to blame when they get arrogant and ignore you if you won't actually get up and do your part to fire them? All right, I'll get back to ranting about that crazy climate plan in a while. But first I'm going to get to one of our sponsors, and then I'll get to our guest there who's in the lobby. So our sponsors, the other way, as I said, we remain independent and not take all of those massive Canadian tax bailouts that are going to our major news outlets and our state broadcaster with the CBC. It's not just through your subscriptions, but through sponsors. And one of our great sponsors has been Bitcoin Well. It's a good Western Canadian company. They're publicly traded. They are reliable, and they give you services to help you get into the digital currency world, particularly Bitcoin. If you're looking at entering, the digital currency world, getting involved in those things, investing, finding out how it works. That's what these guys are all about. They'll set you up. They'll give you free one-on-one consultation. You can sit down face-to-face with a real live person and see if it's for you. You might even sit down for the consultation and think it's not for you. That's fine. They're very transparent and very wide open. I mean, you work hard for your money. We got enough people trying to steal it from you all the time. This is a good, reliable spot where at least you know you can trust them to guide you in how you're going to invest your money and perhaps get involved in the world of Bitcoin. So check them out, bitcoinwell.com, guys, and take control of your money. Okay, let's bring Spike Cohen in. He's been on the show before, and as I said earlier, this was the vice presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party of the United States in the last election, and he's just been a very outspoken person for liberty on social media and all over the place. So thank you for coming on to talk to us today, Spike.
Yeah, thanks for having me on again, Cory. Good to talk with you, man.
Yeah, thanks. And part of why I really wanted to get you on is because we've got, I mean, when the United States, something happens there, it ripples over into Canada. I mean, we've got some differences. We've got some cultural differences, legislative ones, but still we share our issues. And the big debate on both countries right now is firearm control. That always happens whenever there's a terrible tragedy, as there was in Texas. Down there, you guys are really discussing whether you can start infringing, I guess, on the Second Amendment or not with some controls. Up here, we've always been heavily controlled, but our prime minister has reacted by cracking down even harder now, and it looks like they're working towards banning all legally owned handguns in Canada in response to something that never even happened up here.
Yeah.
But, where do we go from there? I guess, I'll just start out, though, there is a problem. I mean, I think it's hard to deny whether it's cultural or where do we go with it. But I mean, there's not really many developed nations that are dealing with such, even if they're sporadic and horrifying, shootings like that in schools. Like, where do we look to try and reduce those and stop that sort of thing from happening?
Well, I think, Cory, we have to look at the fact that in the United States, and like you said, this ripples over into Canada because anything that you can get in the United States can easily be taken to Canada through multiple points of ingress and egress. In the United States, there are more guns than people. Now, whether you like that or not doesn't really matter. There are more guns than people. That's not going to end without some kind of massive door-to-door gun confiscation program, which ironically would end in much more gun violence than any other proposal being floated. So unless you're going to try to pretend that we can make guns go away, which we can't, there are guns. They simply exist. So now we have to decide, how do we interact with and allow people to or not allow people to have access to those guns? Who should we be allowing or not allowing to have those guns? And that results in the kind of policies that we have right now, which led to the Uvalde shooting. Let's be clear what happened there. Government mandated through the no gun zone laws that they passed in the 80s and 90s. I'm not sure exactly when it happened in Texas, but it was in that period. They mandated that school children in public schools be vulnerable and completely unguarded from attack, which has led to school shooters picking schools as their target for mass shootings because they know that they're fish in a barrel zones. There's no one there that's going to protect them. Then they had the police stay outside for over an hour and stop horrified parents from going in to try to protect protect their children or stop the shooting from happening. Then they tried to lie about it and say that, that there was nothing they could do. They had tried everything they could, when the reality was they had literally stood there. Then finally someone showed up and broke the government's orders and stepped in and stopped the shooter. And then they are now blaming it on the fact that, I and many other Americans may or may not own a rifle. That's the reason why this happened. You cannot legislate bad people into not having guns, at least not in the US and by extension, not in Canada. Because in order to be a shooter or a mass shooter or a murderer, you have to have two things: not caring what the law is and a desire to hurt lots and lots of people. Oh, you need a third thing too. You need to not care what the consequences of your actions are. The laws aren't going to stop someone like that. What they are going to stop are law-abiding people who might actually defend themselves against someone like that.
Yeah, and that's what we keep getting to. I mean, the bottom line is law-abiding people are the low-hanging fruit. They're the easy ones to go after because they're compliant. And we've seen this, as you pointed out, in Canada. We have a 9,000-kilometer border between our countries. It's huge. It's the longest undefended border in the world, and it's very easy to smuggle things across it, particularly small items like handguns. And it's been documented by the police. Toronto has a big gang war going on. They have a lot of shootings. Over 86% of the firearms they've picked up off the gangsters were smuggled in from the United States. But what's the Canadian reaction? Let's go after the law-abiding handgun owners who
Yes.
are already very seriously controlled and were never committing the crimes in the first place. But I mean, how do you stop that knee-jerk reaction? That's the problem.
Well, and this is a tale as old as time, Cory, in the U.S. and possibly in Canada as well. During alcohol prohibition, during that war on that particular drug, thanks to alcohol prohibition, it created a black market for rum. At that point, they were two-bit thugs, but they turned into some of the wealthiest and most powerful people in the country inside of a year or two because they were handed a billion-dollar industry for them to have exclusive control over. And as a result, they engaged in brutal gang warfare in order to fight each other for turf. This, by the way, was something that did not happen when alcohol was legal, because if you had a legal product that you were selling, why would you engage in brutal gang warfare? You would just compete with your competitors legally, like on all other legal products. And as a result of that, the government blamed the Tommy gun. That was the problem. It wasn't the fact that they had created a black market and that the black marketeers were fighting each other. No, it was a gun that had existed for at least a couple decades at that point. That was the problem. And so they passed the NFA. We're seeing that now. The war on drugs has created gang violence, which is blamed on the gun. And it makes no sense at all.
Well, yeah, and that's getting to where I wanted to go with that too, because I mean, actually here in Calgary, we have a record amount of shootings happening as well, and pretty much all of them are always gang related. When you have a limited commodity, the unprincipled are always going to get in there, and they're going because it makes it profitable. I mean, we used to have cigarette smuggling when we put the cigarette taxes up too high in Canada 30 years ago. We literally have cheese smuggling, a side note, but because we control our dairy up here so much that it's actually 30% cheaper to get dairy products from the United States if you can get them across the border. But the underlying issue then is the addiction issues. We do have an opioid crisis going on. We got more people addicted to items like fentanyl and meth and things like that than we've ever seen in the past. That brings about a massive drug trade that's very lucrative, and they're having their turf wars. But again, how can we realistically get to that? I mean, I suspect yourself and more like me, but it's a hard thing to sell. If we start moving towards decriminalizing actually some of these drugs and cutting into that, we can get to the solution of that problem. But that's difficult to get past on people. They're too busy looking at the firearms.
It is both from the firearms perspective and from the drug itself. You know, it's hard saying I think that these drugs should be legal or at least decriminalized to people who have, for example, lost a loved one to an opioid overdose, or to someone who lost a loved one to the gang violence in the drug trade. But the reality is those things are a side effect of illegalizing that drug trade. Or at least it's been greatly made worse by that. I mean, tens of thousands of people die from alcohol poisoning every year in the U.S., and it's an absolute tragedy, right? But we've already learned, and we don't even talk about the suggestion of making it illegal because we already learned our lesson with it. We know that that doesn't make it any better. It makes it worse. When you treat a health problem, which is what addiction and overdose is, when you treat it as a criminal problem, you now create a much larger criminal problem. You create a criminal trade. You create violence related to that criminal trade. You create massive cartels that pay off government officials to look the other way, which makes them more corrupt in everything else. They don't stop being corrupt on the other things. So you have a more corrupt government, you have more violent trades, and you have people that have a legitimate health problem that are being treated like criminals or not being treated at all and end up dying in the streets as a result of it. That's not fixing anything. And it's certainly not fixing the gun violence problem.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of it's not just health, but it's mental health, and it should be bundled. I mean, actually, I think as a world, we're getting better at losing that stigma. A person with a mental health issue is just as sick as somebody who has type 1 diabetes. They can't help it. It needs treatment. But and that's the root of where we got to go with these addiction issues. I mean, a lot of people are trying to self-medicate for an untreated mental health problem, things such as that. But getting further, can that be tied a little bit? Because the thing that mystifies so many of us, again, is what is compelling. I mean, we'll never know for sure, but somebody to get up and say, I want to go out into a school and start shooting children. I mean, we see them sporadically. It's going to happen, but is it a perception that we're seeing this more now, or are there really more of these shootings happening?
So if you look at the data, The number of murders, including murders by gun, have been kind of, at least in the US, I don't know the Canadian stats, so these could be completely wrong for Canada. But in the US, they've been kind of slowly dropping. They reached a peak in the 1960s and 70s. Some would argue because of the massive gun control that had happened in the 60s and 70s that it reached a peak around then because a record number of Americans were unable to legally defend themselves. Regardless of whether it was because of that or not, it's starting in the 60s, starting in the 80s, it started to slowly drop. In the last few years, it's been ticking back up, but it's still nowhere near the highs that it was even 20, 30 years ago. So it is much lower. Mass shootings had a major increase in the 1990s, but part of what happened was they lowered the number of deaths from, I think, or number of shootings from number of people that had to be shot from either, I think, 5 down to 3 to qualify it as a mass shooting. So it's hard to compare apples to apples there. What I do know is that looking at it at a granular level, at the why would someone choose to go and kill a bunch of people level, I think that we're looking at very often a failure of the health system to identify actual mental health issues. I think we're looking at a failure of the school system, at least in the US, we're looking at that. And I think we're looking at a lot of failures that result in someone who feels so angry and desperate that they end up doing something terrible like this. And I think in some cases, it's just that some people, whether you want to call it evil or whatever else, some people end up just doing something like this. And that's where you need to look at the deterrent effect. You have to look at what are the targets they choose. This kid didn't go to that school. The reason they pick schools and malls and theaters and things like that is because they know that these are no gun zones. In other words, they're a place where a bunch of people who are law abiding are likely to not have a gun. And they know that the police and the resource officers and the security guards, they're more concerned about their own lives and livelihoods than they are for, saving a bunch of innocent people. And so they know they can get in there and shoot up a bunch of people before anyone actually stops them, if they ever stop them. And we need to, I will ask your audience and you that is listening to this, imagine 2 schools exactly the same, except one has a sign that says no guns allowed, and the other one says we are heavily armed and will protect these children with our lives. Which one do you think is a greater deterrent to school shootings?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, it's similar to just even owning a dog. If a burglar is scouting houses in a neighborhood and he sees one with a barking dog in the window and one without, he's going to pick the one without. I mean, it's just a matter.
Yeah. Predators pick the easiest prey. Exactly.
But I mean, is there room for perhaps some increase on controls within the United States, like licensing, for example? I know that people worry about the incremental effect because that's what we got happening in Canada. Every time the government makes one step, they just take another step and another step.
Exactly.
But a lot of people don't find it unreasonable. That's looking at the individual rather than the firearm itself.
Yep.
Some people just shouldn't qualify to have one. And I know if they're really determined, they're going to get one anyways. But perhaps it could reduce some of the spontaneous possessions and purchases. Is there room for that kind of discussion?
So where that comes from is the reality that some people should not have a gun. That's 100% correct. There are some people that should never be anywhere near a gun. The problem is asking the further question, do we trust the government to make that decision? And no, I don't. It's ironic when we talk about things like background checks and licensing and everything else. If we looked at government as an entity and had them subjected to these background checks and these types of things, they would never pass their own background checks given their history, right? But you have to look at it at another level. So, for example, this Uvalde shooter, and I refuse to use his name, but this shooter, he legally purchased this firearm, which means he passed a background check. He went through the waiting period. He did all the stuff that we are told will stop these shootings. It didn't. Do you know what licensing and regulations and waiting periods and all these other and background check? Do you know who they stop? They stop veterans with PTSD who use cannabis for their or anyone else who's using cannabis medicinally for a medicinal reason that they have. They stop people that have a conviction for a nonviolent felony 20 years ago who haven't hurt anyone since and have never been violent. They round up a bunch of people who can't afford the cost of running through all these background checks and inspections and everything else that sometimes double or triple the cost of a firearm. They run up the cost. They make it impossible for people who are not bad people. And if someone is a bad person, then they don't care what the gun laws are. And they just go and get a gun illegally, probably for cheaper, right? So that doesn't actually fix anything. So from the I guess philosophical standpoint of, are there people who shouldn't have guns? Yes, there are people who shouldn't have guns. Is there an effective way for government to stop them from getting them? I haven't seen that. And I've seen instead that they create this sort of captured market where only those people can get guns illegally.
Yeah, and it's funny. Your argument was similar when I had some debates with some of the more small C conservative viewers when I oppose capital punishment. My point is, it's similar to saying, are there some people who are so horrific that they'd probably be better off dead? Yeah, I
Yes.
agree, but I don't trust the government to be the ones to figure out who they are.
Exactly.
They can't even get their taxes right. I don't want them to be the only ones armed in the nation as well. I mean, that's where you get into some very serious difficulties. Just to kind of close off, though, as you were saying, where's proposed solutions can become bigger than the problem. I saw you respond to a tweet. I forget his name now. The fellow from Star Trek there, who I kind of like, George Takei.
Yes, George
Where
Takei.
he was talking about, let's take all the AK or AR-15s and send them over to Ukraine. You know, just kind of a vacuous celebrity sort of tweet. But where you pointed out, well, how much damage would be caused if you really actually try to go door to door and seize every AR-15 in the country? You're going to cause more shootings than we ever imagined. So
yes, and in order to, I love watching in this case the progressives. They fully are on board with giving millions, tens of millions of unregistered, untraceable machine guns to an entire country of people right now. Or any kind of gun, rifles, machine guns, advanced weapon systems, javelin missiles, long-range weapon systems. Surely that'll never come back to bite us like any of the other times that we've handed off billions of dollars of weapons, right? But, you know, that's okay. But allowing I'm sorry?
It worked great with the Taliban.
It worked great with the Taliban. It worked great with all these freedom fighters that we've armed in the past, like the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. They'll never come back to bite us, right? But at the same time, your neighbor who just wants to be able to defend their home absolutely should not have a semi-automatic rifle, because a bad guy who would have gotten that gun, regardless of the laws, did something bad, something terrible and unspeakable and absolute travesty. But that's the fault of my neighbor who has a gun. But these other people over there, they should have machine guns and whatever else they can have. It is a cognitive dissonance that I hope resolves itself soon.
Yeah, well, people are trying to apply simple solutions to a very complicated problem, and they want a quick fix and an easy fix where there just isn't one to be had. So I just hope we can keep having these rational discussions while we maintain what individual rights we have. I assure you, at least you're nowhere near where we are up in Canada with where things are going right now. It's getting ludicrous up here. But I appreciate you coming on to talk to us about that and just to offer a good reasoned liberty point of view on it. I always do like seeing that perspective rather than some of the traditional conservative liberal sort of things. We got to look at the individuals. So where can we find more information about you and what you're doing these days, Cohen?
Sure, absolutely. So my website is spikecohen.com. You can find me on all social media at Spike Cohen. I've recently started an organization called You Are the Power. We do grassroots, localized, single issue advocacy. And that's if you are involved. And if you're an American citizen, I just realized I'm talking to a bunch of Canadians. So You Are the Power is a political action committee. So we're not actually able to take any contributions from Canadians. But if you're interested in seeing what we're doing, you can go to youarethepower.net. And if you're an American, you can join us and become a part of it as well. But if you just want to follow me and see what I'm talking about, Spike Cohen on all the major socials. And thank you again for having me on, Cory.
Right on. Thank you. I appreciate it. And like I said, there's a lot of resources that we can still share and appreciate up here in Canada and see what's going on. So thanks again. I hope we get to talk again soon, perhaps on something a little less dark than this.
Yes, hopefully so. Yeah.
All right. Thank you. So yes, that was Spike Cohen, as I said, and he was the vice presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party of the United States. A very consistent libertarian, individual-minded person, I guess you could say. And yes, I just like seeing that perspective. I mean, it's the same issue, but different problems. As he said, I mean, you can say, oh, it would be great if we just got rid of all those guns that everybody had, but look at the volume. There's more than one I think it's 1.2 firearms per citizen in the United States. So how realistically can you reduce that number? How can you change that? I mean, maybe that's the goal, but you got to get real about it. And as I said, tweets like that one out of George Takei. So let's just grab them all and send them to Ukraine. You could dismiss it as just a minor tweet, but it's from somebody with some influence in social media polls. So you got to watch for these things and talk about them, discuss them, and get rational. All right, let's get to one of our sponsors that kind of ties into this, and that's the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. They've been a sponsor for us for quite some time, and they speak rationally on these issues as we have been here. These are an association for people who, and not just if you have firearms, but if you're looking to purchase firearms, any sort of way that you're enjoying firearms, whether it's target shooting or hunting or collecting, any of those things, this is an organization full of resources for you. They're an association of other firearm owners. That's how you can network, get to know each other, see where there's events, see videos on safe operation, legal operation of firearms. And also, as more importantly than ever, I think they advocate on your behalf. They push back. They, as you can see, they're showing, exposing the lies. They've taken things to court. They're standing up for you and your right to have those firearms. So check it out, guys. If you value those rights, you got to stand up for yourself because the government's coming after them. And the Canadian Shooting Sports Association is the group that will help you do that. Their website is cssa-cila.org, the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Get on there, take out a membership because they're going to take away your rights, guys, whether you like it or not, if you don't get in there and stand up for yourself. All right, let's see. This is something I went on quite a bit. It's just localized, but this is happening everywhere with that incident Dave talked about. And we're going to talk further about it. I look at some of the people who talk about banning pit bull type breeds are similar to the type of people who just say, we got to ban firearms. You got to look at the individual who's managing it, okay? I mean, an inept, idiotic person can take a dog and make it terribly dangerous. There's no doubt about that. And that person should be held responsible. If the dog's that dangerous, I agree, it has to be destroyed. And I hate that. You know that. Everybody who watches this show knows I love animals a lot, typically more than people. But we got to figure out what the hell we're going to do about this. And there's where I'm not a pure libertarian, as some people talk about, not so much about licensing the dogs. We got to start licensing these owners. I mean, not everybody's responsible enough to own a dog, but how do you do that? How do you move forward? Because there was a case, and as David said, it was a woman who's been living in Capitol Hill for almost 50 years, a person in the community. All she was doing was out gardening. Her neighbor's 3 dogs got in and killed her. They killed her. There's 2 issues going on over there right now. One of them is the dog one, and I think we're going to need to discuss that one more. And also, of course, the ambulance response time. What's that? What's that name? Albatwitch Wiggler is a commenter there. Saying always seems to be the worst dog owners or pit bull owners. Maybe it's just that you tend to take more notice of a weaponized, out of control animal. Yeah, I said it in the newsroom the other day. I mean, a lot of and it's not all pit bull owners by any means, but you see a lot of them. They're out there. Some, douchebag with a mullet who's probably got a 1/4-inch pecker who's trying to compensate for something as their mean-looking dog where they've docked the ears with a pair of scissors and have a spiked collar on it because, inside they're actually weak, sad little people. And they want to have a dog to try and prove something that they're incapable of doing themselves. Yeah, that's my rant on some of those people with those dogs like that. They want a tough dog. They want a mean dog. I was with the Bulldog Rescue for a long time. Bulldogs get mistaken for being strong, tough, violent dogs. They are strong, actually. They're very strong, but they're so passive. They've had so much of the aggression bred out of them. They're scared. I had Stewie. He was a big old grunk. He was scared of squirrels. Totally harmless dog. But we'd have some coming into the rescue that were vicious. Why? Because some idiot would take it in and make it vicious. They would abuse it. They would try and turn it into a guard-type animal or a violent animal. And again, it's not the animal's fault. It's the idiot human who puts them into that condition. And it's the person who does this to them. And I can't stand it. I can't stand dog abusers, any animal abusers. And unfortunately, again, when we start going after breeds, we're not addressing the problem. The problem is the people. And it takes a responsible person. Some say, well, a pit bull type animal is going to do a lot more damage if it attacks versus a Chihuahua. As Kim Holmes is saying, Chihuahuas are worse, but they don't have the power to bite anything but your ankles. That's true. And it means it takes some responsibility in owning those animals. So let's figure out how we're going to do that. I mean, some people own horses. Those things can stomp you into the ground too if you're not careful. You can't blame the horse. I mean, of course, but there's regulations. You can't go into a playground with a horse either, right? Particularly one that's not well controlled. But we got to have a good discussion, nuance. Let's talk further into this, find out what happened, get to the root, and try and prevent. That's the thing, is let's be proactive and look ahead. So again, why were those 3 dogs unrestrained? How did they get loose? What background was there with the owner with those dogs? I mean, I've got 3 dogs at home as well. One we're fostering and a couple we've adopted. And I'm pretty sure if those 3 goofballs got loose, all they would do is slobber on somebody, maybe dig up their garden, and the one dog might do something nasty to somebody's leg. But they wouldn't get in and and kill somebody like those 3 dogs did the other day. It's tragic. They went out of control. So let's investigate, not go knee jerk with this, and try to figure out how to stop these sorts of things from happening. That was just horrible, just a terrible tragedy. The other part, of course, is it took 30 minutes for an ambulance to get to that woman. I mean, I spoke to a paramedic. I talked about that in yesterday's show. He's told me, and I'm going to be speaking from another paramedic on Friday or tomorrow, actually, and we're going to discuss some of the challenges we have with our emergency services right now in response times. But half an hour, and as I pointed out, and as you can see, this map Nico pulled up, that incident happened 10 minutes, 9 minutes drive in a regular car from the largest hospital in Alberta, and it took half an hour for an ambulance to get to this poor woman as she died in the backyard. And now what I'm really getting worried about is the constantly changing story, because Alberta Health Services has gone into defense mode, and they're making excuses for this. And they're saying, oh, it was a dispatch problem, and we didn't realize that it was a life-threatening situation. I mean, the neighbor who stood there, I've heard on the interviews, and we've listened to him on TV breaking down, that poor man who's known that lady for years, came out and found this incident and phoned 911. And you're trying to tell me that he came across an 86-year-old woman who'd been mauled by 3 dogs to what turned out to be death, and phoned 911 and said, I think we just need police. We don't need an ambulance. I'm finding this very hard to believe. You know, if this was the United States, one of the things they do down there is release 911 calls. I'd really like to hear what was actually said during that call. I mean, perhaps, I don't know, a person's in panic, they're afraid. Maybe he wasn't clear on what was required, but something went terribly wrong. Half an hour to a woman in that condition for an ambulance to even arrive. She could very possibly be alive today, had we and not done something about it. And even if that didn't have anything to do with this particular case, we've got some very serious problems with our emergency services. We've been hitting code reds all the time in our major cities where there's no ambulances available. We've been warning about that for years now. We are in dire straits, and there's going to be more incidents of people coming to a terrible outcome if they can't get medical services fast enough in an emergency. So again, we've got to watch for let's just try not to do the knee-jerk reaction. Let's try to look, how can we solve this? How can we mitigate it? Set aside the ideologies and look to what works, because what's going on right now isn't working. And that is just not acceptable. As Gwen commenter saying, a nice photo of Betty in uniform, and also include a photo of the beautiful senior she used to be. Yeah, we can only get one on the cover, I guess, but it was one that just to drive home how she was a person who served in the military, who has just been a very established citizen for a long time, and just had her life brought to a short prematurely for no good reason. Well, there's never a good reason, but it looks like it very much could have been preventable. All right, I see our guest in the lobby. I might bring her in pretty soon. This is something, as I said, I want to talk about. It's an interesting app, and it's with Etick. I mean, that can tie into pets as well. If we're talking about wood ticks and parasites and things like that, our pets are often the ones who are victim to them, as well as ourselves when we get out. So let's bring in Jade Savage of Etick and discuss the initiative of tracking ticks across the country. Hi, Jade. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. How are you?
Oh, very good. Thanks. I just kind of, as I said in the email, or as I told the viewers, I mean, I worked as a surveyor for 20 years. I traveled all over North America, and wood ticks were always a horrible part of my life and working outdoors. Some areas were worse than others, but you're always plucking and harvesting those things off you and trying to keep them. But they're getting worse, it sounds like, or they're spreading. And that's kind of what you're addressing with your app, tracking, wood ticks and where they've been found?
Yes, I guess we're tracking all the different tick species in Canada. So not just the deer tick or the brown dog tick or the American dog tick. So we're trying to follow changes in the distribution of the different species. And of course, some of these species are associated with tick-borne diseases, and therefore we're trying to help people better understand where these ticks are found, but also to get people to realize that there are now ticks in areas where they were not previously seen. And so there are different parts of the country where people are not used to cohabit with ticks. And so we're trying to get them to better understand that ticks are present, however, that not all of them can transmit pathogens or cause diseases. And therefore, yes, we're getting data, trying to follow up the ticks in the country, but we're also returning information to every citizen that uses our platform by informing them of the resources and possibly the issues associated with the tick that they found. So it's a bit of an exchange.
Yeah, well, and that's part of it. I mean, not all ticks are equal, I guess you could say. And that was one of the things I learned as traveling. Like in the Red Deer River Valley here in Alberta, down there, actually, one spring, it was terrible. I came out, I had them all over me, and they were larger, kind of almost red things. And they were easy to find, at least, and pretty slow and docile, so they weren't as much of a problem, as gross as they were. But I did a number of contracts in Pennsylvania, and they have a number of different types of ticks out there. And Lyme disease was a serious issue, actually, with some of our contractors and workers. And they're smaller ticks. They were, the black-legged ticks, deer ticks. And but the thing was, out there, at least medical facilities knew what to test for and look for when it came in, because it's relatively common. Out here, we're starting to see it happen, but our medical professionals might not know what they're dealing with if they have a tick-borne disease present to them.
Agreed. I mean, out east in Eastern Canada, so Nova Scotia, Quebec, Ontario, we've been dealing with these black-legged ticks and therefore Lyme disease for many years now. And even if maybe awareness is not as high as it should be, still physicians are definitely more aware. As we move out west, it's a bit of a different pattern. And you're right that Alberta currently does not seem to have any endemic population, meaning that there does not seem to be a continuous cycle for the black-legged tick yet in your province. But we do see quite a lot of visitors. So ticks that would come on birds, on other animals from either out east or down south. And so there are records of black-legged ticks in Alberta. On Etick, we've recorded dozens and dozens of them. And so we are keeping an eye just to make sure that there are no endemic populations and trying to see how that situation unfolds in the future. But for now, at least, you definitely don't have as many as some of the eastern provinces.
Yeah, well, and that's what's really important with how you're tracking that, because we can't see it. We see outbreaks perhaps that would happen. I mean, a person visiting family out east and has their dogs running around inadvertently, comes back, their dog brings home a foreign type of tick, those things drop off, they breed. I guess if you saw reports on your app of that starting to happen in a region that it hadn't previously, that's when you can start to work towards control or at least warning people that there's something else to watch out for.
Yes, and it's also important for especially people that have been bitten or in contact with these black-legged tick to be able to inform either their physicians or their veterinarians of what they were in contact with. So a lot of people won't necessarily recognize a black-legged tick. And so what our Etick platform will do is at least give them a specific identification. And once they have that identification, they know what species they were in contact with. It's a lot easier than to communicate that information with, as I said, a physician or a veterinarian, and then take a proper course of action.
Well, and likewise, I guess it could comfort somebody if they've had a tick that's predominantly of a benign species that is less likely to give them something dangerous. Then at least they know they don't have to sweat it quite as much if they've had a different type of tick, because your average person just doesn't know one tick from another. They just know they're god-awful and you want to get it off yourself.
Absolutely. So, and again, there are hundreds of records of contacts with some of those, I'd say, more innocuous species in Alberta. And again, as you said, it's very good for people to be able to get an answer rapidly. So we really try to provide a turnover within about 1 to 2 business days.
Okay, so and now Lyme disease, of course, the one we hear the most about all the time, but there are other tick-borne diseases. One we used to hear of in the past was Rocky Mountain spotted fever and other things such as that. Are there more documented cases or any of those happening out here? And is that different types of ticks as well?
Well, again, I'm not a medical doctor, but the vector for Rocky Mountain spotted fever is different. It's not the black-legged tick. It's another species of tick. And that one doesn't seem to be as abundant as it once was. But there are, or I know that there have been some cases of Rocky Mountain spotted fevers in the last few years. So obviously that disease has not been eradicated. And even though we don't speak as much of it as we used to, it is still in the landscape, or at least in the medical portrait of your province.
Yeah, so tick activity, I mean, it's seasonal in nature. I mean, you can get, a tick any time of year when it's warm. I know that, but spring they tend to be the worst. Does your app kind of show, though, track where they're stronger or weaker at different times of year in different areas?
Yeah, so on our interactive map, you can actually go check every single record for Alberta, and you can play with the dates, you can play with the area, you can look at a different species. So, depending on what information you're looking for, you'll be able to see that. However, it is true that in the spring, you have a lot more of for example, the American dog tick. But for the black-legged tick, in Alberta at least, you get most of them in the fall, not necessarily in the spring. So it's important for people to keep aware that there will be ticks in your province, both in the spring and in the fall. But at least based on the numbers from last year, we received, or we saw a lot more records for the black-legged tick in the late summer to fall season than in the spring. So this year in the spring, though, we are ready to have a lot more, probably because this is the second year we are in the province and our services are just better known. So people use the Etick application and services more frequently, I think, now than they did last year.
Yeah, so if a person's gotten the app installed, whether proactively or even after encountering a tick, I'm assuming they've saved it, they're going to send in a picture. Like, how does that work? You would send a picture in your region and things like that through the app?
Yeah, so you can actually just do that on your computer. So you don't have to use the app. It's just to make it easier for people who want to do it on the fly. So all you need is a picture of the tick that you encountered. Then you need to answer a few questions. So we provide so you need to give us the date and where you got the tick. And then as soon as this is done, a member of our team gets a notification, and then they will look at your submission. And if the pictures are of a good enough quality, they will provide you with a clear answer as to what species you were in contact with, what the potential medical or veterinary issues could be, and what you should do if there's anything that needs to be done. So it's very quick. And as soon as we've identified your tick, you can also go and check out your own dot on our map, because that dot will become publicly visible as soon as we have identified your tick.
Right. So mitigating, tick harm on yourself or your pets, I mean, is through education and knowing what's going on in your area and going out. But is there much that can be done for tick control in areas? Like if there's an outbreak or things like that, I mean, is it just kind of beyond our control? We just got to make sure to protect ourselves better?
Controlling for ticks is difficult. Again, because there will be different habitats suitable for different species of ticks. So unfortunately, you cannot control habitat for all different species of ticks all around 12 months a year. So it is not that easy. So there are obviously, if you mow the lawn and if you remove lots of tall grasses from your surroundings, you can decrease tick contact a little bit. But I mean, nobody stays within just their backyard. So in the end, really prevention will be at its best when you're looking at yourself and how you can prevent the ticks from attaching, because trying to control them in our environment is difficult. Lots of people are working towards finding solutions, but there is no silver bullet, at least not yet.
Yeah, well, a lot of it, at least, is knowing where you're going. I mean, if you're watching the app or just paying attention, you can realize, oh, they get a little bad in my area. I might want to inspect the dogs a little more closely, or myself when I get back home.
Yes.
I mean, it's just anecdotal on my part, but I always found them worst in the taller grass rather than the bush. Maybe around the edges of the bush, I found them bad, and usually they don't travel too far before latching in. It was the lower parts of my legs where they would start, though I could find them anywhere on yourself if you're out in the trees long enough.
Yeah, and it might look like a fashion crime, but putting your pants into your socks when you're in tick habitat is a great way to prevent them from latching on. They'll have a longer way to crawl up to reach out your skin. So this is excellent. And also keeping in mind that for many of the tick-borne diseases, not all of them, but the pathogens need several hours to be transmitted to the host. So if you remove the tick rapidly, it decreases the probabilities of infection for, again, some infections such as Lyme disease, for example. So tick checks and good clothing and of course tick repellents together will work very well to decrease the probabilities of infection.
Yeah, and sooner rather than later definitely helps. And there's a lot of myths, unfortunately, with ticks and things like that. To warn people, don't do the red hot needle on it. Don't smear Vaseline on it. There's a lot of ways to safely extract a tick from yourself without going to all those measures that might cause you more damage than good.
Absolutely. And usually just using, for example, eyebrow tweezers very close to the skin and pulling without twisting, because when you twist, you have a higher chance of breaking the head, and then it can be itchy, can cause a little bit of irritation. So yes, there are no better ways than just using tweezers to remove the tick, and pulling it out gently without breaking it is the best solution.
Yeah, and as one of my commenters is saying, yeah, don't panic. And I know that's your first instinct, especially when you brush and you realize this thing isn't just crawling on me, it's stuck, and then you freak out and you really want that off yourself, but just try to stay calm and get it out, because an infection could happen afterwards too, aside from some of the transmissible diseases if you have it extracted well.
Of course. I mean, you've broken the skin, so bacteria can come in, just like if you'd broken the skin with any other implement or a scratch or anything. So of course you have to be careful with that. And yeah, don't panic is a great piece of advice. Ticks are not quick. They're not spiders. They don't run around. And so keep calm and remove them gently is the best solution.
Yeah, they do that really gross, slow sort of walk, actually. And as you said, if the socks are tucked in, you'll see them coming up your pant legs if you're in a bad area. But at least, it's a good spot to watch for them. And somebody else saying chickens, you need more chickens. They love eating ticks. Well, somehow yards that could help is absolutely in areas where it's allowed. But
Yeah.
that's great. Is there more, where would people find information about your app and your site? And is there more advice you can offer?
Well, I would say Google it. Etick is a short word, easy to find. And again, this is not just for the residents of Alberta. We now have pretty much full Canadian coverage. And it's also important for you to keep in mind, not just in your daily activities, but if you travel to another province, especially out east, you can also use our app. So obviously, we're asking you your province of residence because this is where you will get services in case you contract a tick-borne disease or in case you need to consult with your dogs. So don't hesitate to use the platform, even if you think the tick that you were in contact with comes from a different province. But at least for the residents of Alberta, my main advice would be don't panic. Yes, there are black-legged ticks that are coming over to your province, usually through dogs or birds or other animals. But at least until now, you are still doing better than a lot of the eastern provinces. So, be aware, but keep calm.
Yeah, well, that's, it's interactive. So, I mean, it's up to the person, but if they want to help and participate, I mean, the more data you have, the more accurate the entire thing's going to be.
Absolutely. And the more data points we get, the more we can also react quickly. If there are at some point some unusual patterns, there are possibilities of new species coming up from the US through climate change, habitat change. We see the population and distribution of these populations change quite rapidly. So of course, we're talking about the black-legged tick now, but I might be back next year talking about something else. So that is why we need everyone's help into following these ticks. We don't have enough people on the field to collect them. And so citizens here are really helping various researchers adding data to our growing data set and our ever evolving data set. So that's why even if you did one last year and you recognize a tick this year, please submit it. It's important for us. And who knows, maybe you came across something that is different than what you found the previous time.
That's it. And I mean, you could help with veterinary or medical professionals too. I mean, if they can see trending and something's happening somewhere, we can respond better to it. As I said, your average doctor in Alberta is just not going to look for Lyme disease. But if it turns out in a region there's suddenly a big outbreak of black-legged ticks, then perhaps they'll send a bulletin to local physicians just to say, yeah, well, if you have some people presenting with that kind of rash or fatigue or headache, maybe you might want to test for that.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming on to talk to us about that and for the work on the app. I just like seeing, proactive things, using our technology just to help, inform each other. Because, I mean, hey, we've had a rotten couple of years for a number of reasons. I know people want to get outside and enjoy themselves and take part in, we're in Canada. We got some beautiful terrain, but we want to make sure we stay safe too. So thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about it.
All righty.
Have a good day.
You have a good work. So that was Jade Savage of Etick. And yeah, check it out, guys. As you see, it's easy to find online. Cheryl was asking, Jade's still in the lobby. Maybe you can see me. Cheryl was asking, is the app free? I believe it is. But if you give me a nod, I would know that. Yes, she's nodding. Okay, she hasn't departed yet. Thumbs up. Cheryl, the app is free. So get out there, check it out, Etick. It's easy to find on Google. And yeah, take part in it, help participate. Hey, what does it take to just document something if you've run across one or found one on your dog or found one on yourself? As I said, I despise those things. I've dealt with them so much over the years. And there's other aspects to, Google and search in general, as I said. Lyme disease has made a lot of news, but it is relatively rare in a lot of areas, but it can be terribly dangerous if it's undiagnosed in somebody for too long. So see what those symptoms are. Your chances of it in Alberta are unlikely. But if you're out east and you're in some of those areas where there's a high percentage, then you may want to keep an eye out for that sort of thing. And that'll help you too, though. I mean, if you get home and, oh my God, I got one of these god-awful things on my leg. What's it all about? Well, take that picture, send it in, and maybe you can give yourself some peace of mind and say, no, this is just one of the ones you'll get out in the prairies and they're disgusting and gross, but you'll likely be just fine. So, let's see where we'll go now on some of the other things. Somebody had asked, actually, and I think it's, I didn't want to go down too much in the rabbit hole, but asking whether it could be related to bed bugs or for tracking those outbreaks and things like that. That's another gross parasitic bug that absolutely for sure. I won't name the hotel, but when I was in the oil field, I stayed in one that had infestation, and it was just, I still get the willies when I think about that. I think it's even worse than ticks, but that's unrelated. That kind of spreads, unfortunately. People bring those along. Yeah, whether you're not doing your laundry right, things like that. You move hotel to hotel, camp to camp. That happens in the oil field, things like that, or in other areas where you just got hygienic problems, the bed bugs. It'd be interesting if somebody brought up an app, though. Maybe you could see outbreaks and so on, but I'm pretty sure it's unrelated. I didn't want to digress too much on that one, but it's another issue. Maybe Etick will inspire that, and eventually you'll have e-bedbug, and people will trace those things as they encounter them as well. Unfortunately, there's just a whole lot of creepy crawlies in this world that are trying to eat us and spread, and the more we can prevent it from happening, the better. As I said, this summer, a lot of people are going to be getting out and going, doing things, and if you're not as familiar with these things as I was after so many years of working in the trees, and I still get the willies from them, still, the more educated you are, the better the chance you just won't have a negative outcome because you'll have removed it fast and perhaps, again, shared it with Etick, and let's try and track these things down and then knock down the gross diseases those things can bring about. All right, let's speak about one of our sponsors again before I get on to more news items, and that is Bitcoin Well. We'll get back to them one more time just to remind everybody the services they offer. If you're looking into getting, Cecilia Charles, I got to digress. I've got a commenter who's just kind of spamming my thread. Please stop doing that or I will have to block you from posting on there. I appreciate sharing some things, even the occasional link, but just one, not over and over and over again. It distracts from the conversation for others. Thanks. All right, back to Bitcoin Well. So I'm spamming with that, but those guys are paying our bills and they provide a good service. They have ATMs all across Canada. You can see the map of it that Nico brings up now, and then it makes it practical. It makes digital currencies make sense and brings it home to you. I mean, it seems foreign. It seems odd. How could there be any currency other than my own or a foreign currency or a government-run currency? Well, these guys help you so you can set it up to pay your utility bills. They can set up for a savings plan. You can have automatic debit from your bank account into a savings account. They can consult with you and help you work into it in a knowledgeable way. As you can see, they got Bitcoin Academy, and that's partnered with Athabasca University. So you can learn what this is all about and see if it's for you and see how you can invest or what you can do with it. Check them out. They're a good Canadian company, Western based. Of course, I always love that. Bitcoinwell.com, and take control of your money. Let's see here. Jet Gorgon saying, even in the tropics, I had no bed bugs or lice in my huts. Check and secure the place with bug spray. Yeah, worse than ticks. As I said, there's all sorts of things. I mean, there's scabies, there's fleas, you name it. But ticks are something that are happening a bit right now, and you got to watch for the darn things. As somebody, the other commenter was saying, yeah, you tuck your socks into your shoes or flip your waistband out on top of your pants. And when you're in those areas, as I said, I know some of the worst areas I ever worked from was in Manitoba, southern Manitoba, out by Verdun and down that way. Oh, man, you would walk in the tall grass around clumps of bush and things like that. And as soon as you came out of it, you'd see 4 or 5 of those things making their way up your pant legs to try and get to you. So watch for those spots, though. We did learn that, when you were in the middle of a wheat field, you weren't going to have a problem with it. And even in the middle of trees, but it was always the tall grass on the edges of those trees. And, learn to where you got to watch for those things and try and avoid them. All right, as another commenter is saying, it's making it itch. Yeah, that's enough about the bugs for now. Let's talk about something else odious and frustrating and annoying and enraging, and that's our finance minister, Chrystia Freeland. Yeah, this is interesting. I wonder if we're going to hit a tipping point with our liberal government where just enough people with some sense are going to turn against them. As I said, in the Senate, we're seeing senators, liberal appointed senators, turning against Bill S7. And now we're seeing the Parliamentary Budget Office saying that, and this is their words, that Freeland's plan for deficit reduction is not believable. It's not credible. That's what they're saying. They're basically saying our finance minister is full of crap. They're saying her plan won't work. It's not realistic. And it's just not going to happen because she, in her budget, predicted the deficit's going to fall from $113.8 billion to $8.4 billion by 2027. She says it's going to go down 93% in the next 5 years. And if they keep the spending up where they are, that's just not going to happen. And that's what the budgetary office said. You can throw out those numbers, but when you crunch them and actually calculate them, that's just not true. And she's being called out on it. And again, that's before a Senate National Finance Committee. I'm starting to see some value out of the Senate lately, more than I've ever seen before. It's been refreshing. Senators have usually been so sleepy and borderline useless. But in this case, they really seem to be starting to hold the government to account. It's making me start to rethink some of my views on things. People have said that having this unelected group, I believe in having a house of sober second thought. I believe in having a second level of government. I think bicameral is good. I just didn't think that having a bunch of appointed ones for such long terms and everything could ever be effective. But I'm warming to them. I still think it needs massive reform. And the regional imbalance within it is terrible and things like that. But at least at this point, because nobody else is holding Trudeau to account. Jagmeet won't. The Senate is saying that, hey, guys, and these presentations to the Senate in front of the Budgetary Office are saying, no, these numbers aren't working. And, the debt ceiling is up to $1.168 trillion. All these numbers are just staggering. And again, this is why we have inflation. I was listening to an apologist fart catcher on the talk radio on the way in this morning. They're talking about pointing out it's a world issue, parroting Justin Trudeau's line. It's a world issue. We can't do anything about it. Inflation is world. Yes, you can do things about it. World commodities are going to go up. Energy prices, oil, metals, things like that. Sure. Grains, wheats. But still, domestically, when you start printing off the money like crazy, your purchasing power with your local currency goes down and the price of everything goes up. That is in Justin's wheelhouse. And it is his responsibility, and we're paying the price for it. So quit trying to point to the rest of the world, say there's nothing you can do about it. There's some of the irony. Somebody else pointed that out to me saying, oh, it's a world problem. We can't do anything about it, so we won't do anything about it. Oh, except when it comes to climate change. Then all of a sudden, we can do something about it. Yeah, Canada makes up 1.6% of the world's emissions, but we can do something about the world emissions somehow. Really, you got a double standard there. Likewise with that crazed mayor of Calgary and her bizarre council members supporting her, saying that we should punish Calgarians with an $87 billion climate change plan, which will have absolutely no effect on the climate whatsoever. But it sure is going to have an effect on Calgarians. Give it that. God, she's making me miss Ninchi. That says a lot. Those who know me know the amount of times I was on Ninchi's case, a pain in his butt on a number of levels as an activist, and then later as we were writing. And my God, and she was 10 times better than Gondek and this gang of nutcases she has in there, the two Courtneys and Cara. Oh, wow. Calgary is in such trouble. Such trouble. Let's see here. Getting back to another special committee in the Parliament. The more these Liberals talk, I saw a column from somebody the other day, too, saying that, the Liberals are in big trouble with the Emergencies Act. The investigation with that justice, even if it's a Liberal one that was appointed by the government to follow through and see if it was justified, could be in a lot of trouble because the whole narrative is completely falling apart for why the Liberals imposed a modern-day version of the War Measures Act upon its citizens of Canada. And every time these clowns, these ministers, as I said, Trudeau doesn't exactly put luminaries around them as cabinet ministers. Every time they have to speak to a committee, it just gets worse and worse, So, this is one. This is the Deputy Justice Minister, Francois Daigle, said he supported this is deputy minister, so that'd be a bureaucrat, I think. Either way, it's still chosen by the Liberals in the end. They got their facts by watching TV news coverage of the blockade. That's why they felt they needed to impose this act, because I saw it on TV, and it scared me. And I thought we better step on individual rights. This is the case the Liberals are down to. I mean, I know there was also already exposed to a point that they'd gotten some of their facts from CBC, and CBC multiple times had to retract stories because they'd spread false news. These guys, the more they're questioned, the more you're realizing they're incompetent, they're inept. It was a reactionary move. It was an unforgivable incursion upon individual rights in Canada with the invocation of that act. Some people in Parliament, in the Senate, are holding them accountable, at least in these committees. Whether the voters ever will, I don't know. I just don't know. I don't know what it takes to dislodge, speaking of wood ticks, these parasitic Liberals. I mean, how bad have they got to get from this arrogant blackface wearing moron we got for a prime minister who embarrasses us on the world stage every day, does this stunts like this, and we see them exposed like this in committee, but still Canadians keep voting them back in. So again, that responsibility keeps coming back to us. It feels frustrating. Well, again, it gets back to an independence movement. In the short term, what are we going to do? Marine, bring up that kidnapping. Yeah, that was a case of the guy put the baby on the side of a highway. So he stole a minivan, and there was a child in it and took off with it. And I'm just guessing from the facts, they're still just kind of coming out, that was east of Calgary. Pulled over and just dropped the baby on the side of the road and then carried on. Like, the guy's been caught and charged, but this is Canada. This person will be out before you know it. I believe actually Rick Bell wrote on that today, not on that, but on a bunch of offenders in Calgary, again, getting back to City of Calgary, but this happens across the country. Because this is federal, this is justice, this is law. A lot of addicts, violent, repeat offenders, some of them with 60, 50 convictions, things like that, they're still on the streets. They're constantly getting out. This loser who stole the van with the baby, I bet you he's got a whole string of convictions in his past. And these ones in Calgary, we got these meth heads that are on these trains. These are ones arrested, and we just in and out, in and out, in and out, and they're dangerous. They're violent. But if we don't keep them behind bars, they're the easiest predicting the sunrise, but not to our elected officials, appears. Here's another story. So yeah, 24% of airport staff had been laid off. This is the Canadian Air Transport Security Authority figures. So yeah, they're scrambling to rehire. But again, that gets back to a lot of them were just laid off because of the slowed down travel. Some of it was, of course, they were unvaccinated. So we just fired them. They're gone. Stupid. It's not making anybody safer. It's ridiculous. And now, as I said, the nation's getting embarrassed. Our tourism is still getting crushed in Canada. And it says, yeah, so 1,750 screening officers out of 7,400 were laid off. Hundreds never returned. Yeah, they don't want to come back, especially considering a lot of them were probably actually pushed out because they weren't vaccinated. And now we've got airports with people waiting as long as 3-4 hours if they can get on their flight on time. But and there's inexperienced staff in the airports. And the other thing is, you know what? Take one of the layers of things they have to do off their back, get rid of the bloody mandates, and we can get these people on the planes. It's slowing them down. Let's see. Oh, here's a House Affairs Committee again. So this is saying a cabinet bill C-14. This is the redistributing of seats in the House of Commons. It says West East seats. Boy, that's a tongue twister, isn't it? Skewed. Man, these headlines. You're killing me, you guys. Canada's fastest growing provinces are short dozens of seats under the electoral redistricting. This is the bill that's going to guarantee Quebec 78 seats no matter what. No matter what. So even if Quebec, I mean, again, as I said, if the Quebecois are that insecure, they're that worried, they're losing seats because their population isn't going up, screw better. God, you guys, reproduce, get on the job, do a better task of it. It's not our fault. But instead, our cowardly representatives in Ottawa have now legislated it rather than upset Quebec. Say, okay, it doesn't matter how much your population goes down, doesn't matter how much your rotten bills like 21 drive, Bill 21 in Quebec that drives immigrants away from your province, that drives new Quebecers out of there. We, as the rest of the country, have to indulge you and make sure you always have a baseline of seats. That's where I get at a conclusion. Canada is broken. And it really is. And that Quebec tail wags this dog so badly. And I'm going to keep blocking you guys if you keep spamming on there. So there's another one. And either way, C-14 is going on through, and Quebec has got their seats. And guess who's paying the price for it? the West. That's nothing new. And it just carries on. But it's interesting that it makes a story. Wow, the West is getting screwed in seats. Well, welcome to Confederation. That's been happening since you guys began. Let's see, a new history board mandate. Cabinet introduced a bill guaranteeing 3 Indigenous seats on a federal board responsible for historical designations. Man, you know, and it follows a 2019 order that historic plaques address colonialism, patriarchy, and racism. So we just get that woke thing legislated into everything we do. Look, we should be addressing what happened historically. We should be addressing some of the things that happened. You know what? Colonialism was good. Get over it. It was. Yes, things changed. Yes, some things were done wrong. Absolutely. Yes, the residential schools were horrific, and they were trying to wipe out the culture of a bunch of Canadian citizens. And we should learn from that, and we should address that. But quit pretending that this was some sort of paradise in North America before anybody ever showed up here. What was the life expectancy back then? 30? 29? It was a rough, as it's been put out, brutish life and short. And everybody is living a lot better now. As you keep talking about this awful colonialism, oh, how dare you. Come on, guys. Let's quit hanging up on that crap. But now, this is what I don't like when you see quotas on committees. Quotas. Yes, we should have participation from different individuals, from different groups. Absolutely. And we should have that feedback. But when you set those hard quotas, say you have to have this many, and you're going to have a dysfunctional committee, and it's not going to properly represent people. But this is where we're going. So this is where you start redrafting history. This is where you start getting new think. And that's where we should be pretty bloody concerned. Let's see here. Newfoundland police. This is another beauty. This is our money at work. They chartered a $91,000 flight to fly an accused killer across the country. Yeah, this is the RCMP in Newfoundland, or no, the Royal Newfoundland Constabulary. Okay, it's their own police. But they chartered a private jet to get a guy from St. John's to Calgary. The force said he'd been banned from flying commercial. Really? I mean, I guess if private airlines don't want to take this nutcase, what can you do? But put him in a van. You got to pay me $5,000. Handcuff him in the back. I'll drive him across there. This is nuts. $91,000 to move one murderer? He's arrested in Calgary in March, I guess, for second-degree murder. I mean, it sounds like he's a pretty nasty character, and I hope, he's tried and does a relatively serious amount of time. But spending $93,000 to fly him across the country, it's absurd. And that's just, you keep getting these individual cases like this when they pop up. That means there's a lot of spending issues going on all over the place. People say, oh, it's just one issue. Well, it's not. It's one of hundreds and hundreds, thousands of things where they're spending your money, the money you're working for. Brad saying, can't the military fly? But yeah, I don't know. I don't know how often our military planes fly. Maybe that's another way to do it. If they're flying anyway, stick him in on there, chain him in the back. I don't know. But there's got to be a better way than chartering a whole plane to get this clown across the country at $93,000. That's just nuts. Another commenter saying, make him walk cross country and pay me to walk him there. Yeah, who wants a nice long road trip? All right. Well, I think I've covered enough. I'm going to be speaking to, he's a doctoral student in Canada. He's written a lot out there, some columns and things like that in papers. His name's Benjamin Woodfinden, and he wrote a really good article a little while back talking about just this relabeling of populism and how they're trying to make populism sound extreme, or some of the political policies and things that they're labeling as extreme as populist. And it's kind of ridiculous, particularly in response to Pierre Poilievre's federal leadership campaign. So I'm going to have Benjamin on. We're going to have a good talk about that. George Porter, again, he's been an activist. He was a long, long time paramedic in Alberta. He's been pushing, again, for all of these problems we have with our paramedic system. We're not going to talk specifically so much on the ordeal that happened last weekend with that poor woman who died, but we are going to talk about the issue as a whole, and that's going to be really good. And then I do have returned, because she rebooked with me, Leslyn Lewis, and she's going to come on and talk a little bit about one of her press releases regarding, I think it was the World Economic Forum, actually. So we'll see what Dr. Lewis has to say. That'll be a quick interview at the end of the show tomorrow. So it's going to be a packed one tomorrow, guys. So make sure to tune in at 11:30 a.m. sharp, and we will do it all again. Thanks.